Beckett spent a good deal of his earlier life being especially influenced by Italian writers and French writers. So, for example, his preoccupation with Dante's The Divine Comedy was one that lasted for the rest of his life. In fact, when he died, there was a copy of The Divine Comedy beside his bed. He also, when he was 25 or so, wrote a monograph on the French writer Marcel Proust, which won quite a bit of praise at the time too. But it's important as well to realise that um, his preoccupation with Irish writers was always there as well. So, for example, Yeats's lesser known play Purgatory, a play in which a father and son are in this problematic, let's say, relationship, was one which made quite an impact on Beckett. Its influence was especially notable in Waiting for Godot, especially in its setting and in its characterization. But the same relationship between the problematic relationship between father and son is there too. We see this especially in Endgame, within the confines of the locked room. So in that sense, Yeats was a particular influence on Beckett. And in fact, Yeats met Beckett when Beckett was probably about 20. When Beckett had won a prize for a poem he had written, and Yeats complimented him on the poem. This, I think, made it quite an impact on Beckett. Then it's important to realise as well that More Pricks Than Kicks, Beckett's first collection of short stories in 1934, which later won some praise for humour in particular, and a kind of a new sort of riotous, anarchic form, won quite a few comparisons to James Joyce's Dubliners. It's the same basic format. It's a group of stories set entirely in Dublin, and it's one of the few works of Beckett's which is entirely localized in one particular place. Beckett actually met and worked with Joyce, one of his all-time literary heroes. Their relationship began in the 1930s when a young Beckett was introduced to James Joyce by Thomas McGreevy in Paris. Beckett had long been an admirer of Joyce, and in fact helped Joyce to write his last great work, Finnegan's Wake. Beckett was really Joyce's assistant during this whole period because Joyce's sight had failed quite a bit, and Beckett really had to help him quite a lot in the composition of it. There is a reference to Beckett as well in Finnegan's Wake. Sam the penman does better puns than me is Joyce's appreciation for Beckett coming out. The influence of Irish writers is even broader. John Millington Synge's Well of the Saints was another influence on Beckett in terms of his treatment of interdependent couples, or rather pairs of people. So we can see a sort of a prototype of Vladimir Nestrigan from Waiting for Godot in Synge's work as well. One of the lesser known influences on Beckett in terms of Irish writing was Sean O'Casey. June and the Paycock features a character named Captain Boyle who complains of the pains in his legs. A character who is very much echoed in Endgame with Clove, who finds it difficult to walk. Johnny, as well, in June and the Paycock, has also been wounded. So we see the genesis of Beckett's characters who are physically limited seems to have its genesis in these earlier writers too. So that's where Beckett draws some of his influence from in terms of Irish writers. But what about Ireland itself? Why is it so embedded in the text? Why do we have to find it? Why do we have to look for it in order to locate Beckett as an Irish writer? The answer comes in part from a town called Saint-Lô, which was bombed during the Second World War, and Beckett wrote a piece about this, which is supposed to be broadcast for RT radio, but wasn't in fact broadcast. He wrote that overnight Saint-Lô had been bombed out of existence. And this is a really important phrase in Beckett's work because it means that the idea of place is dispensed with after the Second World War. There are only fragments left of place. And it's these fragments that we have to look for in Beckett's work of Ireland. This leads one character in Endgame to say that there's no one else, while one replies, there's no where else. Place has been dispensed with. There are still fragments, though, that exist as half-forgotten memories. Lake Como is mentioned in Endgame, and so is the Ardennes in France. Cove is mentioned, Kov, in Endgame, and this is very likely a reference to the town of Cove in County Cork. Quite significantly as well, a lot of references made obliquely to the Irish potato famine in Waiting for Godot and in Endgame. It's not immediately visible, but it's still very much there as a preoccupation with scarcity and the idea that these characters might succumb to death by hunger. However, Irish humour does appear quite frequently in Beckett's work, that kind of a dark gallows humour that underpins suffering. So, for example, Patrick Kavanagh, the Irish poet, noted that there was a particularly Irish quality to Beckett's work, Beckett as a comic figure. So we see this particularly in the following exchange between these two characters. I've made you suffer too much. It's not that. I haven't made you suffer too much. No. You gave me a fright. Crop's Last Tape, his 1955 play, features a similarly submerged Ireland. One woman is Connacht, I fancy, though that's not related to anywhere else, and a reference is made to a lost love, a girl in a shabby green coat at a railway station platform. So now that we've established Beckett's Irish origins and his occasional use of Irish culture and place names, we can now look for the ways in which Waiting for Godot can be read as an Irish text.